Good afternoon, everyone. You are in the spotlight with Brian Gardner on this Friday, November the 6th, 2015. This In the Spotlight 4-on-1 Football Blitz show coming at you here on this Friday, November 6th, 2015. Hope you all are enjoying your Friday. For some of us out on the East Coast, it's been a warmer than usual Friday for the first Friday of November, so we obviously enjoying that. Hope your day's treating you well, and hope, as always, Fridays, looking forward to the weekend and all that brings. So we have a full show here on tap for this Football Blitz show here this week. First of all, I want to apologize for being on the air a little later than planned. We're aiming for 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We're about 20 minutes late. Sometimes that happens, but I apologize for that. So on today's show, we'll do our usual deal. We'll look back at last week's NFL games, look ahead to this week's NFL games. Talk about last night's Thursday night football game, which really, I for the foreseeable future, I don't think there's gonna be too many good Thursday night football games. We were kind of spoiled early on that we got a few good matchups. Usually, you don't get good matchups. Now that they're exclusively on the NFL Network going forward, they won't be that good. So, not much to talk about there, but we will address it. And then college football. Now, those of you that have maybe just been watching us, or fans of our podcast for the last couple of weeks, and even those that are, been longer than that, fans of our podcast, that we don't do a lot of college football on this show. We usually just do like a little thing at the end. Usually just highlight the big games coming up on the weekend. Last year we didn't really do anything until the end of the season when we got into the playoffs and we started talking about that and the bowls and all that. But with the playoff rankings being released on Tuesday, we're going to do more than just highlight the games this weekend. We're going to actually talk about the playoff rankings on today's show and use that to kind of set up. Because now that you have these playoff rankings, okay? Now that you have these rankings, now when you watch these games from this weekend and on, now you know what the stakes are. You know where you're at. You know what you got to do. You know how far from where you need to be you are. So it adds a little bit more to these games now instead of just trying to guess where you are based on where you are in the top 25. Now you have an idea, okay? If you're a fan of one of these teams or if you're playing or coaching one of these teams, there were a lot of surprises in these rankings. We will talk about these rankings later on in the show. There was a lot of surprises in those rankings. A lot. And I think they're good surprises. I will say this much. If there's anything, we'll talk more about this later in the show, but just to kind of set the stage here, if you will allow me to do that. You looked at what happened in the playoffs last year, and you look at what happened this year. What's happening so far this year in the first rankings that we have. It's showing you that with the committee way of doing things, okay, instead of the old way of the BCS, okay, the committee way of doing things, in my opinion, is much better than a computer. You're seeing the changes just by having actual people make the decision. Okay, I'll explain more about that later. But there's a little more variety. There's a little more parity. We're getting fresher matchups. We're getting better games. I feel like it's helping the college football season. I feel like it's helping college football in general. It's interesting again. You don't necessarily just think it's going to be all SEC all the time. I think it's been great. I have never been more invested in college football over the last maybe year and a half than maybe in 15 years. That alone should tell you something. So we'll talk more about that later on in the program. Before we get going, though, as always, want to remind you all ways in which you can interact and contribute to our show. Have your voice heard by emailing us at itspotlight411@gmail.com. You can also follow us and tweet us at itspotlight411. We have 3 hashtags on Twitter we'd like you to use. You can use one, you can use all, whatever you like to do. You can use hashtag itspotlight411, hashtag ITSFootballBlitz, or hashtag ITS5. That one, of course, to represent our 5th anniversary on the air as a podcast. Also, you can find us on Facebook in the Spotlight 411. And then once you find us, like our page, and there you go. So, all right. So let's get right down to business right now. We will start off, as we always do, with the NFL. And by taking a look back at last weekend, which, as we set up last week, was going to be headlined and centered around the unbeatens. Last Thursday night, the Patriots knocked off the Dolphins, and they obviously stayed unbeaten. So that sets the stage for the weekend, which featured tests for a number of the unbeatens, including the biggest test, of course, a Green Bay-Denver game, in which one of those teams was guaranteed to suffer their first loss of the season. And that's the game we will start with, because if you're talking about the weekend being centered on the unbeatens, no better way to start than the game that featured two unbeatens and featured the first loss from one of them. And look, it wasn't much of a game, which was sad. On paper, you look at this, Rodgers versus Manning, and granted, Peyton Manning is no longer, no longer Peyton Manning, but still, on paper, this looks like a good matchup. And I think, we talked when we were making the pick for this game, myself and Jeff Tech, we had discussed the idea. Well, I had discussed the idea that really what it came down to, in my opinion, the biggest difference was going to be Denver's defense. The Packers, while their defense isn't horrible by any stretch, and we talk about these offensive-based teams, the Packers, the Colts, the Saints, these kind of teams. Of all of them, I would say the Packers, just by default, have the best defense because of Clay Matthews. Broncos have taken themselves out of that because of that group of offensive center teams, because now they're more about their defense. They got a great defense now, and they manage games better just by default because of that. So, to me, the deciding factor in this game was going to be the Denver Broncos defense, and you saw that in spades on Sunday. They shut down the Packers. They just pure and all the way shut down the Packers. Held them to one touchdown, one field goal. That was it. 29-10, an easy peasy kind of win. Peyton Manning just 29 pass attempts, 21 completed passes, 440 yards. Just a like kind of game. Just an easy win. And if you had asked me a week ago if this was going to be a kind of game where there wasn't be much to talk about, there isn't much to talk about. The Packers just got their rear ends handed to them. And large part because Denver just defended well and showed you what the difference is between a team that doesn't have a good, only has maybe an average defense, and a team that has a great defense to go along with a good offense. And that's what the Broncos have. And, of course, playing the Broncos on the road, look, there's not much you can say. The Packers offensively got shut down. Their defense isn't as good as the Broncos. Broncos defended well, got the job done, and that's and offensively did their thing, and that's the bottom line. So the Packers get knocked down to their first loss, and then of course they got to play the Panthers, who is one of the leftover unbeaten teams this week. So not going to get any easier for them. But the Packers get knocked down, the Broncos push on, and what is it's a very competitive AFC. Headlined by the three unbeatens at the top of it. And speaking of one of those other unbeatens in the AFC, the Bengals, who we talked so much about this season and been very praiseworthy of on this show, me and myself in particular, they faced a big test. Now, we talked about what the Bengals have done. You talk about their big win against the Ravens in week 3, where they on the road, where they came from behind and kept fighting and clawing. You talk about their win against the Seahawks in overtime at home. They've had some tests. This is not like last year at this point where they've had some tests. This is the part of the year last year where they were in a mess. They started falling apart. They lost their first game. They got trounced, and then they just started falling apart. This year they have not done that. And this week they featured a test. They're coming off a bye. They were playing Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh with Ben Roethlisberger back. Pittsburgh defense, and look, Pittsburgh recognizing the fact that, at 4-3, and that's where that loss last week really hurt. Look, we are at a point where we have, if we win this game, all intents and purposes, we're okay. We're still in this thing. For the Bengals, it's represented a chance to, you've already beaten the Ravens on the road. Here's a chance for you to beat the Steelers on the road. And then both games you have left against these two rivals you have in your building. And the most they can do is go 1-1 against you. It's a huge, huge deal for the Cincinnati Bengals, who are trying to break the glass ceiling and finally do more than just be a wild card, win their division, be a high seed. And, you know, early on, the Steelers came out, you know, got a touchdown, 7-3. They lead the game after the first. And then it was just a scratch and claw kind of effort. And the Bengals come from behind in the fourth quarter. Very reminiscent of the Raven game. Very similar to the Ravens game earlier this year, where they had to fight tooth and nail. And you know, these wins, those kind of wins are so much better than the easy wins. And they win the game 16-10. And let's think about this from the Bengals' perspective. They've proven themselves. They've beaten their two rivals on the road in their division, beating the Seahawks in overtime. They've been tested. This team's been tested. Anybody that doesn't think, and I know all the criticism of Andy Dalton, he's not a great quarterback. But how many times have we seen? How many times have we seen a quarterback like an Andy Dalton win a Super Bowl? We've seen it quite often. It is a quarterback's league. But you know what? To that end, you can still be an average or slightly above average quarterback, which I think slightly above average what Andy Dalton is. You can be that way, but if you have sure-handed receivers, all of a sudden you become just as good as one of the elite ones, because your receivers, you can trust them. There was a stat on ESPN.com I saw today, which mentioned the Bengals have only dropped 7 passes this year. Only 8 teams have fewer. When you have receivers like that, they can take an average or slightly above average quarterback and make them out to be even better than they are. And that's the bottom line. Last year, you know, for all the hell we all gave the Bengals for falling apart mid-season, one of the biggest reasons they had a lot of injuries. Some of their big offensive players were hurt. That's what that was just as much of a reason as any other. The Bengals are whole this season. They're healthy and they're playing well. And they're being more aggressive. We talked about like how the Bengals and the Falcons are very similar. They're very fundamentally sound, play it safe football teams. They won't beat themselves, but they you know, they don't beat themselves because they don't take chances. The Cincinnati Bengals are taking chances this year. The Falcons, they have a little bit, but not so much, not as much as the Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals are taking chances this year. They're being aggressive, and maybe it's because they have their full receiver core. Maybe because they are healthier this year on offense. Maybe that's why. Whatever the case, they're being aggressive, they're being assertive, and it's showing, and that's why they're unbeaten. That's why they're unbeaten, and that's why they're going. We know they're going to the playoffs, and they're going to win this division. They'd have to have now they'd have to have a historic collapse to not win this division. The Steelers are 4-4 now. And you know they're not going to win out. Even if the Bengals go, I mean, you're in week 9 now. Even if the Bengals go 4-4, that's 11-4. 11-4. The Steelers, let's say they win their final, what, 8 games. It's 12-4. They'd only beat the Bengals by a game. And again, you're assuming that the Bengals only go 500 and that since the Pittsburgh Steelers win every single game left on their schedule. That ain't happening in either case. The Bengals will probably lose a game or 2. Okay? They will. But the Steelers are too, and that's the difference. Right there. The division's gone. Any chance the Steelers had of taking this division went up in smoke. Went up in smoke against the Bengals last weekend. And you know what? Another thing, too, is the Bengals aren't just 7-0 now. They won last night, so now they're 8-0. So it was 5 games. So it was 7 games left. Even if they go 3-4, again, I mean, see, that's what I'm saying. That this division is gone. This division is gone. The Cincinnati Bengals have already pretty much established that they're going to win their division for the first time in a long, long time. They're going to win this division. They're going to be a high seed. How high is up to them. If they keep rattling off wins and staying up there with the Patriots and the Broncos, then, hey, who knows? But you have to be, if you're not impressed by them, if you still don't buy the Bengals, then I don't know what to tell you. It was an impressive victory. And the Steelers, you're still alive here. You're 4-4, but can't afford to drop too many here. We're at the midway point of the season now. We're through the midway point of the season. We know how important that is. Now we're entering into that point of the season. Entering that third point of the third part of the season now, where it's all about positioning. Get yourself in the best position you can. Stay competitive. Get yourself in that position. Be in the picture come week 12. And not just by hanging around. Be in the playoff picture by week 12. That's your goal over these next few weeks. Week 9, week 10, week 11, week 12. And that's what the Steelers have to do. Ideally, you want to win at least 3 or 4 to do that. You want to be around 7 or 8 wins. That's why I've always said, if you're around 7 or 8 wins by week 12, you have a good chance. If you're not, then you're on the fringe. So the Patriots stay unbeaten. The Broncos stay unbeaten. The Bengals stay unbeaten. The Packers do not. What about that last unbeaten team? The Panthers. They played a game on Monday Night Football against the Colts, which was a fantastic game. Well played by both teams. Carolina threw a lot of stuff at the Colts. I thought the Colts, this was probably one of the better games in recent weeks where they responded. Unfortunately, again, it comes down to, and we talked about it ad nauseum, the offensive line of the Colts just not good. It's not good. They can't give Andrew Luck enough time. And that really, in my mind, was the difference, because as good of a defensively as the Panthers played, if the Colts if the Colts just had an average offensive line, I think the Colts would have won this game. Even with how good the Panthers were, even on being at home, even offensively, doing what I thought was a decent job, Cam Newton and company. The Colts would have won this game with a good offensive line, or even a decent one. Because I thought the Colts, when Andrew Luck had a chance to throw the football, I thought they played well. I thought their defense played well in spots. And that's the thing that's gotten lost in all this, is the Colts defense has gotten better this year. That defense has kept them in a lot of games and given them every opportunity. And then the Colts made a big play, 17.4 quarter, got the game into overtime. And just didn't get the job done. The offensive line didn't help matters. Andrew Luck didn't make some big plays late. But again, I think it all comes down to the line. As a quarterback, if you can't trust your offensive line to give you time, eventually it gets in your head and you start making the wrong decision, and you start taking more chances, and you start being more errant with the ball because you feel like, any moment you're going to get knocked down. You feel like you do not have the time. You have to make quick decisions. You have to be, unnecessarily aggressive and reckless. And that's what's happened with the Colts. And that's why their offense has no rhythm most of the time. That's why they make a lot more mistakes. Why they turn over the ball a lot is because their offensive line isn't good. It's causing them to make mistakes. It's causing them to force the issue. It's a mess. So the Colts lose to the Panthers 29-26 in overtime. They are now 3-5, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Panthers stay unbeaten. They get another test next week against Green Bay. Panthers stay unbeaten. It wasn't a pretty win, but like the Seahawks, they don't care how they win. They just win. Needless to say, both teams played well in that game. It's an unfortunate loss for the Colts. The game was there for them again. Game was there for them. They just protected Luck and the offense more. Hey, who knows what would have happened? So all unbeatens but the Packers still unbeaten. That was the big theme on Sunday, the unbeatens. The big theme for Week 8 was the unbeatens. Outside of that, there were some other interesting developments. Seahawks and Cowboys played an ugly game. Only one touchdown was scored, and that was in the second quarter by the Seahawks. Seahawks win 13-12, all about the defense. Wilson, 19 for 30, 210 yards, was not pretty at all. Neither team offensively really did much of anything. For the Seahawks, that's not very abnormal. For the Cowboys right now, it's not abnormal given the state that they're in. Cowboys were right there at the end. They could have did something, just didn't get the job done. I mean, if you're Dallas and you're their fans, all you can do is praise the team for continuing to fight. It is what it is there, and the Seahawks got a win that they needed. Both teams needed a win, but looking the Cowboys state expectations, I think, are maybe a little more tempered. And the Seahawks now at 4-4. The Cowboys dropped to 2-5. It's a big win for Seattle just to keep themselves in the mix. Another big game on the docket was between the Ravens and the Chargers. It was a game between two teams that are just trying, I guess, more or less be playing for pride. At this point, both teams likely not going to be involved in anything. Ravens win 29-26 for their second win of the year. Chargers drop to 2-6. They're 0-4 on the road. Ravens finally get their first home win. They lost Smith in this game, which could be devastating for that game. 319 yards, a TD. Look, again, neither one of these teams are going to factor into anything. I thought the Chargers maybe had a chance of playing their way back into things, given how how things are going. With some of the AFC wild cards, but that ship has sailed. The Chargers and the Ravens not going to factor in anything. That was more of a game just from pride standpoint. But I thought it was an interesting game because of where both teams were last year and where people thought they might be this year. And it's just kind of a surreal kind of thing in a way. Giants Saints was another big game. Boy, defense, no defense at all. Horrendous in that game defensively for both teams. And look, for the Saints, maybe you're not that surprised. But for the Giants, you expect better. But then again, with Drew Brees at the quarterback position, he gets rid of the ball quick. Pass rushes don't have a hard time getting to him. 39 for 50, Drew Brees, 505 yards, 7 TDs, a historic effort. Eli was great as well. You can't say a thing about the offenses in this game. Really, it was just the defense, and really what it was, the Saints just scored 3 more points more than the Giants did. It's one of those games. Where the other team just scores more than you do. Maybe if you made an extra defensive play here or there, things would have been different. So it's a huge win for the Saints, a tough loss for the Giants. And here's what's so huge. The Saints, you talk about digging yourself out of your early season hole. The Saints have done it. They're 4-4. They're 3-1 at home. They've taken advantage of their home games. They've beaten some good. They've had 2 big wins in a row. And right now, they're right there. They're right back in the mix. And maybe the division might not be there for them because of how far along the Panthers and the Falcons have. But now they put themselves in a position to maybe steal a wild card because of how they played. The first stop when you're coming out of an early season hole is to get to 500. They've done that. Now what you want to do is try to win the next game, get out in front of 500. They've done a great job of picking themselves up. They're a younger team. Drew Brees has led them. They've all stuck to the script, and it's worked. So a huge win for the Saints and a very tough loss for the Giants. Vikings got a big win over the Bears, 23-20. It was a big, good effort for the Bears. Vikings now 5-2. Bears dropped to 2-5. They're out. Vikings very much in things. The Rams with a big win over the 49ers, 27-6. The 49ers, just an embarrassing effort. Look, we know that the offense has struggled all season long, but defensively they didn't really do anything. You could tell that team is just done. Early season they were fighting. They knew they couldn't score, but they were fighting, at least defensively. Didn't happen this game. The Rams just exploited everything that they could exploit. The Gurley had a great game. Rams are very much in it this year at 4-3. There's a lot of talk about the 49ers. Colin Kaepernick is going to be benched this week, and he should be. Everybody's talking about the open receiver that he missed. And look, if you watch Colin Kaepernick enough over the years, you know the guy does not have good field vision. All right, everything's about his arm and throwing it down the field and explosiveness from a mobility standpoint. I said it for the last couple of years. I thought they made a big mistake in going with Kaepernick, and I still stand by it. I will stand by it. Obviously, I have more of a reason to stand by it now. Everybody's thinking, well, it's just because there's so much turmoil, and it's he doesn't have the support of the locker room. Don't make excuses. Don't make excuses for him. When they made the change to Kaepernick, everybody was behind him. Everybody. He's had plenty of time to grow, mature, and develop as a quarterback. He's gotten worse. They're making the right decision, benching him. They're making changes. They're trading guys away. The 49ers are in rebuilding mode, and they need to be. So, but that was a big win for the Rams. The Cardinals do their thing against the Browns, 34-20. Falcons, it's funny. We sat here last week and we mentioned how, there's something about the NFC South. You've seen the good, you look at the records year in and year out. Whenever you see some of the top teams play the bad teams in that division, it's almost like it's got a history of upsets. But usually it's upsets on the road again, on the home turf of the bad team. Well, in this case, this was the Falcons losing at home, which is very rare and almost unheard of for them, to the Buccaneers, who are now 3-4. So you got to keep an eye on them. Buccaneers win in overtime, 23-20. A great effort by the Bucs. Great defense. Demise Winston had a great game, and the Falcons a tough loss. And now, what's interesting is, it's funny. I just mentioned that the Saints might think the division's gone, and might be because of the Panthers being. But the Falcons have dropped 2 games. The Panthers are still unbeaten. And the Saints are now there at 4 wins. The Saints are right up there. If the Saints could somehow pass the Falcons, then that's something you wouldn't have thought 2 weeks ago. But that's a tough loss for the Falcons. And it's a huge win for the Bucs on the road. And now at 3-4, you have to keep an eye on them. So goes to show you that sometimes the upsets in the NFC South don't necessarily have to be on the road for the better team. And that's happened sometimes in the past, but most notably, usually when you get these upsets, it usually happens at the bad team's place, not on the road. I mean, not at the home of the better team. But in this case, it was the 2-4 team that was on the road, and they're the ones that pulled off the upset and pulled off the win. So a rare kind of occurrence, but a big win there for the Buccaneers over the Falcons. Chiefs handled business against the Lions, 45-10. They're at 3-5, so they're trying to play their way back into things. And they're doing trying to pull off a New Orleans Saints kind of thing here, and they're getting close. So kudos to them. The Texans win the war of who still has the ambition to try to stay in this conference or stay in this division game here, and that's Titans were sitting there at 1-5, Texans 2-5. Texans now 3-5 and tied with the Colts. Again, we mentioned this last week. If the Colts were to lose to the Panthers, if the Texans had won, they could tie them. Now, look, I don't think anybody thinks that anybody but the Colts are going to win this division, even given everything that's happened. But at the same time, if you're the Texans or you're the Titans, you have a chance to stay competitive longer than you maybe should be. You should take it. At least it gives your fans something to talk about. So the Texans win the game between teams trying to kind of I described it pretty horribly a couple seconds ago. I lost my train of thought. That's why I said it didn't really make much sense. But here's a better way to describe it. One, the game between teams trying to delude their fans into thinking they have a chance. That's a better description. Neither one of these teams is going to win the division, but it's kind of like what the Browns did last year. The Browns had more of a chance last year, where your fans look up and go, "Hey, we're tied with the Colts. Maybe, just maybe, maybe, no, oh, okay, that kind of thing." But the Texans win that game. The surprise of the weekend had to be the Raiders beating the Jets 34-20. Jets played their worst game of the season. The same team that handled the Patriots well last week, and we praised them for that. The Jets are now 4-3. They went from 4-1 to 4-3. Now, one of them lost to the Patriots. The Raiders have surprised some people this year. Much like the Rams, have done. They've beaten some good teams. And I remember it wasn't just a couple of weeks ago that some people were picking the Raiders to beat the Broncos. And I wondered why. Well, now I don't wonder anymore because they're sitting here at 4-3. They're very much alive in the playoff standings. Derek Carr's done a great job in Oakland. And it's a tough loss for the Jets. The Raiders defended well, which they tend to do. And, offensively just found ways to get around the Jets defense, which really didn't have a great game, but didn't have a bad game either. That's a tough loss for the New York Jets. And a huge win for the Raiders. And the Raiders have turned a corner. The Raiders have most definitely turned a corner, just like the Rams have. Those two teams have accelerated their rebuilding efforts big time this season. Much like the Browns kind of did last year. The Bills, the Eagles, the Redskins, and the Jags all had byes. That's all that, we talked about all the other teams. So it was a big weekend for the NFL. There was lots of great games. The unbeatens obviously highlighted the weekend. Obviously, that's what it was all about, was the unbeatens, highlighted by the Broncos game with the Packers and the Panthers and Colts on Monday Night Football. But all in all, it was a great weekend. All but one unbeaten comes out of the weekend unbeaten. You had some very big games with potential playoff ramifications. It was a good weekend for the NFL after a couple, I thought, lackluster weeks. The Saints-Giant game was really good. I mean, you had some close games. Cowboys-Seahawks, which was ugly, but still a close game. I mean, you had some close games. The Colts-Panthers on Monday night was a good game. So you had some close games. That's what you look for. And you had, the unbeaten, the theme of the unbeatens being tested. So yeah, it was a great weekend for the NFL. As far as our picks go, I went 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I went 5-1. Jeff Tech went 1, 2, 2, and 4. So Jeff Tech had another bad week. So through week 8, I am 30-18. Jeff Tech is 26-22. So I picked up 2 more games on him. So he has not had a good couple of weeks. Stop picking the Colts and the Broncos. Not the Broncos. You should pick the Broncos on being. Stop picking the Colts, buddy. That might help. If he watches this, he'll be mad at me for saying that. But whatever. All right. So we now flip the script to week 8. Probably week 9 of the NFL season. Hard to believe, we're already more than halfway through. And now, again, as I mentioned a few moments ago, we are in that third phase of the season, and where it's all about playoff positioning, getting yourself in the best situation you can get for the stretch run to the playoffs. The idea is you want to be around at least 7 or 8 wins. You want to be in the picture. If you're not in the picture, you're done. Or you're just kind of like an artificial. You're like you're just hanging around. You don't want to be hanging around. You want to be firmly in the picture, and that's what some of these teams. That's their goal over these next 4 weeks is to get in the picture. Some teams, if you're still unbeaten, then you're going to the playoffs. You're fine. If you're already around 6 or 7 wins, 5, 6, 7 wins, you're already in good shape. And see, if you look at the playoff picture right now, just think of it, the AFC. Patriots, Bengals, Broncos, already unbeaten. That's 3 spots right there are guaranteed. Those teams are going to the playoffs, they're already in. Okay? Now, a couple weeks ago, we might have said the Jets were more than likely headed for being already in, but they've taken some lumps over the last couple of days. You pretty much figured that the Colts are going to be a playoff team because that division's terrible. So you figure 4 spots are going to be taken. You got 2 more spots. Who grabs them? The Ravens aren't going to be able to. They only got 2 wins so far. The Chargers only have 2 wins so far. The Chiefs could, if they continue to surge, can sneak in. They're 3-5. Texans are 3-5. I suppose they could maybe do something. I doubt it, but I wouldn't put much stock in it. Raiders are at 4-3. They're alive. Jets 4-3. They're alive. The Bills 3-4. I suppose, and the Dolphins, they're 3-4. They're still alive. We'll see. One of those teams might play themselves out this week with a loss, in my opinion. Because we're getting to the part of the season now where if you're under 500 by more than a game, then I think you're in a kind of dire straits. But yeah, if you're looking at the AFC, I think you're right. That maybe down to like 3 or 4 teams still alive. Maybe just 3, because of how with the 3 unbeaten at the top, and you've given the Colts a spot. And the NFC, the Panthers are unbeaten. The Packers are 6-1. So that's 2 spots you pretty much figure right there. You're giving 1 spot to whoever the NFC East winner is. So that's 3. You got the Falcons who will likely make it. That's 4. You got the Vikings at 5-2. You pretty much, if they continue at this pace, they're going to be in. I mean, so really, the way some of this season has gone, a lot of the spots are going to be settled. A lot of the spots can be settled. You might be only, as you come down the stretch, you might be only looking at the wild cards, because some of these divisions are going to be gone pretty quick with the unbeatens. And it might be only 1 or 2 spots available in each league. I mean, that's a contrast to the last couple of years where, until late in the season, most of the picture wasn't pretty much known. So it's quite interesting. Last night you had a Thursday night game. It's got our week 9 started. It wasn't much of a game. The Bengals 31, the Browns 10. The Bengals just handled their business. Great game for them. Browns dropped to 2-7. They're not going to factor in anything this year like they did last year, and they're out. And if you're the Bengals, 8-0, week 9, you're sitting here still unbeaten. You're in great shape. Can't be in better shape at this point. So not much you can say about that game. And what's on tap for the rest of the weekend? What's the theme? What's the big thing here? Well, some teams, you got the Packers looking for redemption against the Panthers after suffering their first loss, looking to return the favor and give the Panthers their first loss. You got the Patriots at home against the Redskins, and what could be an interesting game, although I think the Patriots shouldn't have an issue. But I think the Redskins might surprise some people early in that game because the Redskins have played very good competitive football. The Saints have an easy game this week with the Titans, so they should be able to get back over 500. And then you got the Dolphins and the Bills game, which in my mind could essentially be a play-out game, an elimination game, because I think whoever loses this game ends up at 3-5 going into week 10. I don't like your chances. I'm sorry. I just don't. Dolphins just have gotten to where they're at is huge for them. I applaud them for it. To me, this is a must-win for Buffalo after all they've been through in the first half of the season. And being at home, we'll see what happens there. To me, that essentially would be an elimination game. Rams and Vikings, that's a huge game because the winner of that game is going to, Rams win it, they tie the Vikings in the playoff picture. Vikings win it, they might, the Vikings win it, they get a nice little leg up and end up at 6-2 and right up there with the Falcons and company. So the Jets will get the Jaguars weekend, so they have a chance for a rebound win. The Raiders will be with the Steelers, which is a huge game for the Raiders because if they really want to stay in this picture, being the Steelers would help. Because now think about this: they would be at 5-3, and they would have knocked the Steelers under 500 going into Week 10. That's huge. That's huge. Giants will have a very tough task against a Buccaneers team who's coming off a big win. That is going to be an interesting game because of how the Buccaneers can be. I know we tend to focus so much on how there's always upsets within the NFC South division, but we've also seen some of these NFC South teams beat some good teams outside of it too, especially in their building. And the Buccaneers will have a chance here. Falcons will get an easy game against the 49ers. Broncos Colts, which will be probably the biggest game of the weekend. Obviously, there's a lot of history there. Eagles Cowboys on Sunday night, and Monday night game for the first time in a couple of weeks is not a good game. Bears Chargers. Neither team is really involved in anything. So some interesting games. The theme for this weekend kind of goes along with the phase of the season we're in. Positioning. If you lost a game, you're looking for redemption, get back on the right track. If you're winning and you're on good momentum, keep it up. Positioning, and that's going to be the theme for the next few weeks. Positioning. The teams with buys this week: Lions, Cardinals, Seahawks, Ravens, Texans are the teams with buys this week. All right, so let's get right down. Let's first talk about the games we're going to make picks for, and of course, we're going to start with the Packers and the Panthers. 6-1 Packers, 2-1 on the road, 7-0 Panthers, 4-0 at home. 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern game on Fox from Carolina. The Panthers are going to defend. They're not going to shy away from playing ugly. This is a tough draw from the Packers following the loss to the Broncos because the Panthers are going to defend them. They're going to contain them. They're going to make this game a lower scoring affair than they would want. The question for me is that the difference between this game though and last week for the Packers is defensively it's not going to be as much of a tall task because we know the Panthers aren't a great offensive team. So the Packers, even with their slightly above average defense, do not have to worry about Panthers running all over them on offense. The question is going to be, can the Packers do enough against the Panthers defense? I don't think they do. I've seen I like a lot of what I've seen from the Panthers in the last couple weeks where they've been tested. I think their defense is very, very good. I think the Panthers are playing the way the Seahawks have played the last couple of years when they're on. That's how much I think of the Panthers right now. So in that in mind, I am picking the Panthers to win this game. Jeff Tech also is Jeff Tech's actually picking the Packers. I thought he was picking the Panthers, but he is picking the Packers. So Panthers for me, Packers for Jeff Tech. The second game we're going to pick, a 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern game on CBS from Buffalo. 3-4 Dolphins, 2-2 on the road, 3-4 Bills, 1-3 at home. This to me is a must win for either team to stay alive in the race for the playoffs. Must win for me. Bills have had a tough few weeks going into their bye. Dolphins have had a nice few weeks coming out of their bye and all their changes. I'd favor the Bills here. I think they're going to put in a good effort. I think the bye week was good for them. I think they're going to come out with a great effort here because I think the Bills are the better team. So I expect, especially at home, and given the fact that, this is the same team that beat the Colts in week 1 by an immense amount, nearly beat the Patriots in week 2. I'm picking the Bills here because I think they're going to get back on track this week. I think you're going to see a better offensive game. Defensively, I think they're going to be back to getting after it. So I'm picking the Bills. over the Dolphins, and so is Jeff Tech. So both of us go with the Bills. Second game I'm going to pick is the 4:25 p.m. Eastern game on CBS from Indianapolis, Indiana. 7-0 Broncos, 4-0 on the road. 3-5 Colts, 1-3 at home. Second straight week the Colts have to play an unbeaten. This time, although they are playing them on the at home, I should say. I don't like this game for the Colts. I really don't. I think this is I think this is a worse draw for them than last week. If the Broncos weren't better defensively this year, in a kind of an offensive game, they could maybe handle it. But we know the Denver Broncos can score. We also know they can defend. The Colts, with the way their line has been, I don't like this game for the Colts. I actually don't think this is even going to be a close game. I think the Broncos can win this game very easily. I am picking the Broncos to win this game. Now, this is a tough game for Jeff Tech. And for those that do not know, maybe you're tuning into our Football Blitz for the first time. Jeff Tech's our former technical tech guy from our days on talk show and just an audio podcast. And even though he's no longer with the show, because we like, as part of the football show, we like to make picks and kind of compete with each other. He still gives me his picks week to week, so that we can still do the whole competition, pick six challenge. How many did I get right? How many did he get right? So, but if you know Jeff Tech, he lives in Indianapolis, and he loves the Colts. He picks the Colts no matter who they play every week. But another team he likes to pick a lot is the Broncos, and he usually picks them every week. Those are usually two of his lock picks. So every time the Colts go against the Broncos, they're like, and of course the Broncos are quarterbacked by Peyton Manning, used to be a Colt, so maybe that figures into it. But whenever he picks whenever he has to pick the Colts-Broncos game, it's like torture for him. And he usually does pick the Colts in the end, and he did pick the Colts here. But it's usually torture for him. But he did pick the Colts. And I always laugh at him when these games happen because he hates them. But all right, 8:30 p.m. Eastern game on NBC from Arlington, Texas. 3-4 Eagles, 1-3 on the road. 2-5 Cowboys, 1-3 at home. Eagles trying to get back to 500 to stay up there with the Giants. Cowboys just desperately trying to get a win at all costs. Romo, of course, is not eligible to return to November 22nd. Des Bryant is back. If the Cowboy defense plays the way it did last week, then I think they can at least contain the Eagles. But the problem is the Eagles are a much better team, offensive team, than the Seahawks are. And even though the Seahawks are a better defensive team, the better offensive team should be able to at least score points even on a good defense. And that's the reason why I'm picking the Eagles here. Because even if the Cowboy defense plays as well as they did last week, the Eagles are a better offense. So they're going to put probably more points than the Seahawks did against the Cowboys defense last week. And with the Cowboys in the state they're in, they're having trouble scoring. And the Eagles aren't a horrible defense. In fact, the Eagles are at least a decent defense. So I don't like the Cowboys' chances here. I think the Eagles win a close one. And Jeff Tech has also picked the Eagles. So, all right. 2 more games to pick, and the games that we have selected are 1:00 p.m. Eastern game on CBS from Heinz Field in Pittsburgh, PA. 4-3 Raiders, 2-1 on the road. 4-4 Steelers, 2-2. You asked me a couple weeks ago if I was going to pick a Raiders game, I would have said you're nuts. But the way the Raiders have played against good teams, I'm going to pick it, even though they're on the road. And look, the Raiders, they're going to defend. The Steelers are going to defend. So it's going to be probably a more lower scoring affair. Even with Ben Roethlisberger back, I think this is going to be a close game. I think it's going to be actually a good game. Derek Carr played really well for the Raiders. I expect this to be a good competitive game. I do think the Steelers will win this game, though. Their backs are kind of against the wall here. They know they have to win. I expect the Steelers to win here. And maybe probably squeak by is what I would guess. Squeak by for win. Jeff Tech, though, is picking the Raiders. So he's going with a little bit of an upset here, which I think is pretty cool. And it's a good upset to pick, for sure. The final pick we're going to make is a 1:00 p.m. Eastern game on Fox, Minneapolis, Minnesota. 4-3 Rams, 1-2 on the road. 5-2 Vikings, 3-0 at home. Teddy Bridgewater has played great. Peterson's been great. The Vikings have been great on both sides of the football. The Rams have played extremely well as well. Both these teams having a nice real comeback resurgence. This could be a good game, but I think the difference for me is the fact the Rams are on the road. They played better at home. even though they got that great win against Arizona on the road. The Vikings have played really well, and the difference I think is, again, playing on the road for the Rams, and the fact that the Vikings running game I think will give the Rams problems. They've had problems against the run this year, so that I think Peterson will be the big difference in this game. So with that in mind, I am picking the Vikings over the Rams. Jeff Tech has picked the Rams. All right, so just to recap, we picked the 6 games that we picked. Here are the 6 games and our picks. I picked the Panthers over the Packers. Jeff Tech picks the Packers over the Panthers. We both picked the Bills over the Dolphins. I picked the Broncos over the Colts. Jeff Tech the Colts over the Broncos. Both of us picked the Eagles over the Cowboys. I picked the Steelers over the Raiders. Jeff Tech the Raiders over the Steelers. Vikings for me. Rams for Jeff Tech. Those are our picks. Our picks for this week's NFL Week 9 games. Our Pick 6 challenge for this week. Of course, we'll look back at those games next week and see how we did on our predictions. And, of course, go over all those games as well. Outside of those games, here are what other games are on tap for this week in the NFL. 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern game on Fox from Foxborough. 3-4 Redskins, 0-3 on the road, 7-0 Patriots, 4-0 home. I expect the Redskins to keep that, as I mentioned earlier. I think the Redskins will keep that game close early on, but the Patriots will probably blow it open late. Patriots should win that one easily. 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern game on CBS from New Orleans. 1-6 Titans, 1-2 on the road. 4-4 Saints, 3-1 at home. Saints will win this game. Again, easy, as I mentioned earlier, an easy kind of game. They should be over 500 this week, which would be huge for them. 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern game on CBS from the Netherlands, MetLife Stadium. 2-5 Jaguars, 0-3 on the road. 4-3 Jets, 2-1 at home. Easy. Jets should win this one, even though the Jaguars have played better than they should have, and shouldn't even have 2 wins this year, but they have. They did play well against in a couple of circumstances and surprise, but I don't think that'll be the case here. Jets have had a bad couple of weeks. I think they'll get back on track and win the game this week. Keep a game to keep an eye on for sure. 4:05 p.m. Eastern game on Fox from Tampa, Florida. 4-4 Giants, 1-3 on the road. 3-4 Buccaneers, 1-2 at home. Giants should win this game, even but again, Buccaneers have surprised us over the years. The NFC South has put off some upsets outside the division when there's a potential for this to happen. They play hard. They play good football. They're competitive. Giants have sometimes been complacent. There's a recipe here for an upset. This would be my upset special kind of game right here. Keep an eye on it. I'd still expect, but I think the Giants will eke out a win here, but there's reason to worry if you're a Giant fan going into this game. This could be what's the word I'm looking for? I can't even think of the word. Wow. A trap game. This could be a trap game for them. 4:05 p.m. Eastern game on Fox from Levi Stadium. 6 in Santa Clara, California. 6-2 Falcons. 3-1 on the road. 2-6 49ers. 2-2 at home. The 49ers have just given up. The Falcons should win this one easily, even though it's on the road. Especially coming off the loss last week. I think the Falcons will win this one. And finally, Monday Night Football. Not much of a game this week. 8:30 p.m. Eastern game on ESPN from San Diego, California. 2-5 Bears. 1-2 on the road. 2-6 Chargers. 2-2 at home. I'd favor the Chargers here. They played better at home this year. And if they want to cling to any hopes of a playoff spot, they have to, getting going now. Even then, that's still a crapshoot. But I think the Chargers are the better team. They're a more multi-layered team. I think the Chargers will win this one. Again, the Lions, Chiefs, Cardinals, Seahawks, Ravens, Texans all have byes. So that's it. That's your Week 9 in the NFL. Next week, you go beyond this week. Next week, obviously we'll talk about Week 9, but as we preview Week 10 features some really big games that will more than likely settle some of the playoff picture. Might take out a few of the teams that are kind of hanging around that you're not really sure about. But there's some big games in that week. There's the Cardinals and the Seahawks, the Chiefs and the Broncos, the Patriots and the Giants, the Vikings and the Raiders. I mean, there's some big games that weekend between teams that are kind of just fighting to be in the picture and some upper echelon teams. So that next week 10 should bring some interesting. We'll talk more about that obviously next week. Last week, I want to bring this up because we got a lot of mail about it. Last week we talked a lot about Greg Hardy, who, had that issue with Des Bryant on the sidelines of last week's Cowboys game. You might not be aware of this, but Deadspin posted some pictures about concerning Greg Hardy's domestic violence case, where showed the injuries to the victim, and the Cowboys know about the story, haven't made a comment. Greg Hardy didn't make a comment. And a lot of people have mentioned, you add that on to the fact that, Greg Hardy had that issue on the field last week with Des Bryant. How much are the Cowboys going to take? And look, everybody knows that there's a story with Greg Hardy that goes back 18 months with the whole domestic violence situation. Okay. The pictures just give you the idea of how bad it was and what it was. All right. But but it's not like nobody knew that that's not like nobody knew that there was this issue. Okay. It's not like nobody knew that this wasn't a thing. We know it's a thing. Everybody knows it's a thing. And until something is done about it, until there's a punishment or whatever the case may be, from a punishment legally or whatever the case may be, what do you want the Cowboys to do? What do you want them to do? There's nothing they can do. This is something they knew about when they signed the guy. We talked about this last week. If the Hardy situation for the Cowboys gets worse, if he continues to get it cause problems with teammates and stuff, then fine. Okay, you have to do something. But as far as the domestic violence thing goes, nothing. They know about this. They've known about this forever. What do you think he should have been playing at all the last 18 months? That's that's a completely different story. But the Cowboys signed them knowing full well what happened 18 months ago and what the situation was with Greg Hardy. So anybody thinking that because this got out that they're going to do something immediately about this, they're not. Because they knew about it. I mean, people knew that something had happened 18 months ago. Okay? We all know what's gone on with Greg Hardy. So nothing's going to change because of the fact that the pictures came out. The Cowboys ain't going to do anything. I'm not saying they should. I'm not saying they shouldn't do anything. I'm just saying they're not going to do anything. I'm not putting myself in this in a position where I'm saying that they should do something or they shouldn't do something. But the question I was getting asked in our email box was, do you think they will? The answer to that question is no, I don't think they'll do anything. Another thing that was asked a lot about, the other thing I was asked a lot about in the emails this week was about the Lions. They fired their GM, they fired their president. The Lions ownership is very upset, and they have a right to be. Look, this is a team that last year surprised everybody, finally made strides, made the playoffs, were very good at the end of last season, especially defensively with their run defense. And this, week 1, they had a tough loss, and week 2, it followed up another. I mean, to me, the Lions are not a bad team. I don't know if I would have fired the GM. I don't know if I would have fired the president. To me, the Lions do not look like a bad team. It's one of those situations. It's kind of like the Ravens are going through and the Chargers. None of those teams are bad. None of them are bad. They had a couple of tough losses early on, and they just, and then their schedule never got easier, and it just kind of careened out of control. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes that happens. But again, they're not bad teams. The Lions are not a bad team. It's like the Ravens and the Chargers aren't. They just haven't had the luck. They've lost some tough games, and it is what it is. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with them, the Lions making those kind of changes. Contrast that with the Dolphins, the changes they made. The Dolphins were a bad team. They're still a bad team. I look at the Titans. I think the Titans are a bad team. I think too many of us just bought into their own hype. You know, it was funny when everyone was talking about Titans last year, oh, they might be a sweeper and everything, and then they end up having a bad year. And then this year, it was like, oh, they'll probably rebound this year. It was injuries last year, and they're still bad. I think we got to rule out. I think the Titans are just like the Texans were a couple years ago. They're a bad team. Just that people bought into the hype that their franchise was trying to spew to you. I think it's as simple as that. But I don't think the Lions are a bad team. I don't think the Ravens are a bad team. I don't think the Chargers are a bad team. I don't think that any of those teams should make big changes. I don't think they're that bad. I mean, yeah, you could tweak things here, but I don't think they need wholesale changes. I mean, the Ravens are the same team that made the playoffs last year. So are the Chargers. Same team that was competitive last year. Lions, same thing. You don't just lose it over one offseason. Just that they haven't had the breaks that they had last year. It's simple as that. Simple as that. So those were the top topics in our email box this week. And by the way, just to wrap up here with the Greg Hardy situation, I just read this. Apparently, Ed Werder of ESPN mentioned, this is his quote, "I don't think for 1 second Jerry Jones is going to reconsider his position with Greg Hardy." And this is despite the photos. So that's why I said the Cowboys ain't going to do anything. So the Greg Hardy thing, the Lions, those were our top topics in our email box. In the last couple of weeks, after we talked about all the games, I've usually gone to the email box and answered questions from fans about the NFL, like particular topics and such. And so normally I would actually read off the question. Instead, I just told there's so many questions about the same thing, I just decided to lump everything in again, just address it all together. So that's why I did it the way I did it this week. All right, so we've done enough with the NFL. Let's jump to college football because there's a lot to mine there. Because of the playoff rankings, which we're going to start with before we get to looking at what's on tap for this weekend. And as I mentioned in the opening, once you start getting to the playoff rankings, then you get to, and then eventually the playoffs and the bowls, we'll be doing a lot more college football. We did that last year, because it gets interesting, more interesting. Let's look at the rankings first. Right now, I'm going to pull them up here. I'm going to go through them and see here. All right, here we go. Number 1 was Clemson, who was 8-0. LSU is at 2, 7-0. Ohio State 3, national champion. Ohio State 3, 8-0. Then Alabama at 7-1. Notre Dame at 7-1. Baylor at 7-0. Michigan State at 8-0. TCU at 8-0. Iowa at 8-0. Florida at 7-1. And then Stanford at 7-1. Utah 7-1. Memphis 8-0. Oklahoma State 8-0, Oklahoma 7-1, Florida State 7-1, Michigan 6-2, Ole Miss 7-2, Texas A&M 6-2, Mississippi State 6-2, Northwestern 6-2, Temple 7-1, UCLA 6-2, Toledo 7-0, Houston 8-0. Those are your rankings. Now, let's talk about the surprises. Clemson at 1, Notre Dame at 5. TCU at 8, Florida at 10 are the big surprises in my mind. LSU being as high as it is, not that shocking. Ohio State being at 3rd, anywhere in the top 5, we knew Ohio State was going to fall. We knew Alabama was going to. Notre Dame, despite the loss being so high, is surprising to me. Maybe it's because, and the conspiracy theory is going to say it's because they're Notre Dame. I really don't think it's that simple. I think Notre Dame being at 5 is more of an indictment on everybody behind them. Because what that tells you is the committee does not buy into Baylor. They don't buy into Michigan State yet. They definitely don't buy into TCU, which really is flabbergasting to me because, the TCU fans are still raw about last year. So clearly the committee is still down on TCU. They were down on them last year. They didn't put them in, and they should have been in. And now they start out so far removed. I think what people were expecting, the top 4 was going to be the top 4. Clemson, LSU, Ohio State, Alabama. That's not surprising. Maybe the positioning is, but those were just, I think people had that combination of 4 teams. And I think then people thought maybe Michigan State, then TCU or Baylor, and then the other, whatever team is at 6 would be at, well, that isn't at 6 would be at 7. And then Notre Dame. So I understand why it's a surprise. You look in the AP, TCU is number 5 in the country. Alabama's number 7. Notre Dame's number 8. So it really was a surprise to people. Florida at 10. I think Florida is vastly overrated. I'm sorry. I just think I like Iowa at 9. I think that's a good place for Iowa at this point. You can't tell me, if you've watched the games, you cannot tell me that Florida's better than Stanford or Utah or even Memphis. You can't. You can't. I don't argue with Florida being top 15, but Florida being in the top 10, I think is a joke. I just think it's a joke. Obviously, when these things come out, other than the surprises, okay, one of the things that people will talk about is who has the potential, who are the sweepers, who has the potential to sneak in and do some things here. Look, if you're looking at this from a standpoint, there's a lot of games left to play. And at least one of the top 4 is going to lose. When all is said, I think Clemson's going to be there in the end. I think LSU's going to be there in the end. I think Ohio State's going to be there. I think there's only going to be one spot that's going to be a toss-up between everybody else. And either they do what they did last year and give it to an SEC team in Alabama or Florida, or they give it to a Notre Dame, a Michigan State, or an Iowa or Baylor or TCU. I think you're going to see Stanford or Utah get up there pretty close to getting in, but I think they're going to fall back. I don't think Memphis will get in despite everything. I think your top 9 teams are the only ones that are going to factor into the equation. Or top 10 teams are the only ones going to factor into the equation. So for me, if you're looking for a sweeper outside the top 10, I don't think you're going to get it. And I only think one spot is really up for grabs. I think Clemson, LSU, and Ohio State are going to be in. No matter what happens the rest of the way. Because I think the 3 of those 3 teams have proven far and away to be the best among the 3 best teams in the country. I think they are the 3 best teams in the country. You could argue with their alignment, but I think they're the 3 best teams in the country. And here's the thing. LSU and Alabama will play itself out. And look, I think LSU is a team more people are behind at this point than Alabama. So even if Alabama were to beat LSU, see, that will put, if Alabama was to beat LSU, that would put Alabama in. And LSU would probably get that 4th slot, despite the loss. And I'm thinking that's probably the only way you get 2 SEC teams into the top 4. But what I'm thinking is that LSU will beat Alabama, and that would take them out of the equation. I'm thinking Ohio State will knock off Michigan State. I think that will take them out of the equation. I think Florida will be out of the equation. So what I'm thinking is this. I think Clemson's gone. I think they're in for sure. I think Ohio State is in for sure. I think LSU is in for sure. So my thinking is Notre Dame, Baylor, TCU, Iowa, one of those teams gets the 4th spot based on what I think will transpire over these next few weeks. And given the position Notre Dame's in right now, I'd make Notre Dame the favorite. Because they're already clearly highly regarded more than any other team outside the top 4. Because they're already 5. And obviously, if some of the teams in front of Notre Dame lose and Notre Dame moves up, then they're in a much more secure position later on anyway. So it should be interesting. But if you're thinking if you're asking me if I think somebody outside the top 10, there's anybody outside the top 10 in the rankings this week that I think could be a sweeper that could do some things, I don't. Again, I do think it's potential that Stanford, Utah, even Memphis for a while could break into the top 10 and make you think that something could happen there. But in the long run, I don't think it will. I think you're looking at Clemson's definitely going to go. I think LSU will more than likely definitely go. And Ohio State will definitely go. And then it's the rest of that one spot will be between everybody else. Alabama, Notre Dame, Baylor, Michigan State, TCU, Iowa, Florida will all be battling for that last spot, I think. And I'd give the nods to Notre Dame for that spot. Because of where they're already at right now. Because I figure Alabama's going to lose. I figure Florida's going to lose. I figure Michigan State's going to lose. And I don't think I don't think the committee seems to like Baylor, TCU, or even Iowa. They didn't like Baylor or TCU last year. And they're already showing signs they don't this year. So, with that in mind, I'm going to say that Notre Dame has the edge to get that spot. Assuming Alabama loses like I think they will. So now that we have the rankings, the first rankings, and obviously every week there'll be new rankings and we'll look at them and see what's going on. You look now at the games this coming weekend and you see what games of impact in week 10 of the college football season you have. Baylor already won last night 31-24. So they're okay for this week. Notre Dame has a tough test at Pittsburgh at noon on ABC that bears watching because Pittsburgh's 6-2. They're having a good year. Notre Dame cannot afford any losses at this point for obvious reasons. That would be a game I would seek out. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, ABC, 7-1 Florida State at 8-0 Clemson. That's a huge game. Might be it might be the last impediment Clemson has to a perfect season as far as going into the championship, into the playoffs. So that's a huge game. 3:30 p.m. Eastern on Fox. 8-0 TCU takes on 8-0 Oklahoma State. That's a big game for TCU on the road. If they win that might, you would think that would improve their standing. And again, the committee hasn't seemed like they like TCU. So, but if they ever lose that, then that pretty much will take TCU out of the equation and might bump Oklahoma State into the top 10. Just have them switch roles. That could be what happens there. A big game for Iowa at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, ESPN, 8-0 Iowa at 4-4 Indiana. Indiana can play tough. That's a tough game for Iowa on the road. The 3:30 p.m. Eastern window of games on Saturday is actually a really good window. There's a lot of important games there. Let's see what else. Is there anything else of interest? Oh, duh. How could I forget the headline game? And probably This is the game I'm factoring in that Alabama's going to lose. Probably the biggest game of the season, in my mind, at least the regular season. 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern on CBS from Tuscaloosa. LSU 7-0 versus 7-1 Alabama. This, talk about perfect time to release those rankings. This could end up deciding whether Alabama makes it or not, because I think LSU could still play their way in. This could be the game that decides whether Alabama makes it or not, because they lose this game. That's 2 losses. There's a lot of teams out in front of them. This is a huge game, especially since they're playing it at home. This is a huge game that can say a lot about what happens the rest of the season. Huge game. Probably the biggest game in the SEC all year. So you want to make sure you tune in for that game for sure. And if you ask me who I think is going to win, I think LSU is going to win. I think Fournette's that good of a player. I think he's that much of a difference maker. I think LSU is going to win that game. I do. That's a huge game. That's a huge game. You got a couple really good games in the 3:30 p.m. Eastern window on Saturday, and then you got the Big Daddy game at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern tomorrow night. The Big Daddy of them all kind of games. That's a great game. It's like an early playoff kind of preview. That's a great game to start November with. A great college football game. Well, not a great game to start November with, but a great game to kind of underscore the playoff rankings for in the week and get the momentum going towards the playoffs. It's a great game. Definitely want to tune into that game. All right, so that's a story in college football. As I said, week to week, we will, we'll look at the rankings. We'll preview the big games over the weekend and do that kind of thing. So you get a little bit more college football coverage from here on out. And then, of course, once the playoffs start, we'll obviously do a lot with that. We did that last year as well, because obviously when you get into playoffs and you get into the, national championship, it's just plenty to talk about, and bowl games and all that. It's plenty to talk about. All right. Let's see. I'm looking at my notes here and seeing, okay, we did everything. We got through everything today. So we addressed the stuff from the email that you all, from the email box, from as far as NFL topics you all wanted us to discuss. So we did everything. So with that being said, we are done for today. As always, the show might be over, but that does not mean you have to stop interacting and contributing to our show, interacting with us. You can send feedback, topic ideas, breaking news items, questions about the show, questions about the scheduling of the show, feedback, reactions to things that were said on the show or talked about. Any of those things you can do via email, Facebook, and Twitter. You can email us at itspotlight411@gmail.com. You can follow us and tweet us at itspotlight411. And please remember to use the hashtag itspotlight411 or hashtag ITS5. That hashtag, of course, represents our 5th year as a podcast. So please feel free to use one of those hashtags, if you will. You can also find us on Facebook. To search for In the Spotlight 411, and then make sure you like our fan page once you find it. If you want to catch up on any episodes, maybe you only tuned into a part of our show here today. You want to catch up on any of our episodes since we debuted here on Google Hangouts and on YouTube. Just check us out here on Google Hangouts and on YouTube. To search for In the Spotlight 411, and you'll find all of the episodes since we debuted here on Google Hangouts and YouTube. All 9 episodes over the last couple weeks. You will find you can watch them anytime. I know everybody's waiting for the audio version of our shows, because some people just prefer to listen to podcasts in audio form, not necessarily in streaming form. Again, we are not, as I mentioned last night on the show, we are not done uploading episodes to our new host sites yet. That will be completed over the weekend. I only have one more episode left from the old batch to do. And once that's done, so pretty much Tuesday when we have our next show, everything will be ready on Podbean and on iTunes, so that if you ever miss an episode or want to catch up on any episodes, you can do so right on Podbean and on iTunes in audio form. You can check us out. So That'll be good for those of you that prefer audio podcasts and not visual. So keep that in mind. I apologize that's taken so long. This just takes a long time to upload past episodes. We're uploading episodes from from the past 5 years from other sites, trying to keep everything to one area to make it easier for everybody. So just bear with us. And again, Tuesday everything should be up and running so that you can listen to us in audio form when you want to catch up or when you want to check us out, and not just in visual form. However, if you're a new fan of our podcast and you want to check out some of our episodes from before we moved here to Google Hangouts and on YouTube, you can do that. You can go to, you want to check out the first 31 episodes of our show, our original episodes, you can go to Blog Talk Radio where our first 31 episodes are. And then outside of that, if you want to check out any of the other episodes that we've done over the last 5 years, you can check us out on talkshoe.com, libsyn.com, or iTunes, on all these sites, TalkShoe, Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, Libsyn. Make sure you search for us under our old title, In the Spotlight with Brian Gardner, and you'll be taken to our old show pages where you can check out numerous episodes from the last 5 years, so you can get a better sense of who we are, what we've been doing, and all that stuff. So if you're interested in checking out some of our past episodes from the last 5 years, be sure to do that on any of those sites, talkshoe.com, blogtalkradio.com, libsyn.com, or iTunes. Again, just search for us under our old title, In the Spotlight with Brian Gardner. And if you want to catch up on our episodes since we debuted here on Google Hangouts and on YouTube, again, the only way you can do that is by checking us out here on Google Hangouts and on YouTube by searching for In the Spotlight 411. And once you find our channels, once you find us on there, you'll have access to our channel of all the shows since we debuted here on Google Hangouts and YouTube. It's 9 episodes in total, and you can check those out and catch up if need be. So keep all that in mind. That is it for today. That is it for this week. 3 shows in the books. Next week, 3 more shows coming at you. Our usual Tuesday and Thursday primetime shows, and of course our usual daytime football blitz. So all 3 coming at you next week. Our next show will be Tuesday night, which will be November the 10th at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Sports wrestling combo show, as it usually is. We'll talk about the latest developments from WWE, especially in light of the Seth Rollins situation. Any sports headlines outside the NFL and college football, which we always do for the football blitz. So we will cover NBA, MLB. We'll cover it all on Tuesday. That will be Tuesday's show. Next Thursday, our usual entertainment show, but we're going to be doing a little bit of sports. Actually, more than a little bit. We'll be doing quite a bit of sports on Thursday as well. Entertainment-wise, we'll take a look at the box office, preview the box office, and then dedicate the rest of the show to previewing the college basketball season, which is beginning on the way late next week. So you're going to get a double dose of sports next week, some sports on Tuesday and some sports on Thursday. So make sure you tune in for that. And of course, our Football Blitz show will be coming at you next week. I'll announce when that will be airing on Tuesday's show, as I usually do, because I don't know yet if we're going to do it on Friday or if we're going to do it earlier than that. So 3 shows will be coming at you next week, Tuesday and Thursday, broadcasting live here on Google Hangouts and on YouTube at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern. And then, of course, our Football Blitz show, which will be airing sometime during the day next week, more than likely either probably Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, but I'll let you know more about that on Tuesday. So with all that being said, thank myself for another great show, pat myself on the back, and thank all of you for your continued support and contributions to the show. Thank you so much for listening and for joining me here on this Friday afternoon. Those of you that joined me live, thank you for joining me here on this Friday afternoon. To those that will be checking this out later on Google Hangouts and on YouTube, thank you for checking us out and watching the podcast, and for joining us. We appreciate that. That is it for this week. I hope you all have a great rest of your Friday, a great weekend, and a great start to your week next week. We'll see you back here for our next show, broadcasting live here on Google Hangouts and on YouTube this coming Tuesday, November 10th at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, have a good afternoon and a good weekend, everybody.